The plane hadn't even taken off when chaos broke out in row 14. A woman with a sharp voice and sharper glare stood over a young man, demanding he move from the window seat he had paid for. Her reason: she always needed a window seat. Her entitlement was so loud, passengers all the way in the back turned their heads. The young man, calm but firm, refused to budge, showing his boarding pass as proof that the seat was his. That should have been the end, but not for her. She launched into a dramatic speech about how unfair life was, how she had special needs for comfort, and how he was being selfish for not giving in. Every word dripped with arrogance. The tension spread like wildfire. Passengers whispered, phones tilted up to record, and flight attendants rushed down the aisle, trying to defuse the scene. But the more they reasoned with her, the louder she grew. When she realized no one was supporting her, she turned to the crowd, expecting backup. "Can you believe this? He won't give his seat to a woman." She barked silence. Then, one by one, people shook their heads. Some even laughed. She had crossed a line. The internet soon got a front row seat to her tantrum, thanks to the videos that went viral within hours. Millions watched in disbelief as this woman demanded what wasn't hers and got completely shut down, not just by the man in the seat, not just by the airline staff, but by everyone. What began as her fight for control became her public humiliation. And in the end, the entire world agreed. Entitlement doesn't fly. Daniel loved flying. For most people, airports meant stress, waiting, and cramped spaces, but for him, it was a chance to sit by the window and let his thoughts drift above the clouds. This trip was supposed to be simple, a 4-hour flight to visit his sister in another state. Nothing dramatic, nothing unusual, just him, his backpack tucked under the seat, and the quiet hum of the engines as the plane prepared for takeoff. He had boarded early, found his window seat in row 14, and settled in with a small smile. The view outside was perfect. The sun was starting to set, painting the horizon with streaks of orange and purple. He pulled out his headphones and a paperback novel, feeling that rare sense of calm that came just before a journey began. But calm never lasts long when entitlement decides to board. A sharp voice cut through the chatter of passengers still finding their seats. "Excuse me, you're in my spot." Daniel looked up. Blocking the aisle stood a woman in her mid-40s wearing oversized sunglasses even though the cabin lights were dim. Her hair was perfectly styled, her lips pressed in a tight line of authority. She jabbed a manicured finger toward him. Daniel blinked, then glanced at his boarding pass. Row 14, Seat A. Then he looked at hers as she waved it impatiently. Row 14, Seat B. He met her gaze calmly. "Actually, I think you're right next to me." He tapped the middle seat. Her jaw tightened. "No, I always sit by the window. That's my seat." Daniel offered a polite smile, the kind you give when you're sure there must be some misunderstanding. "I paid for the window. You're in the middle." The woman's voice rose half an octave. "I don't sit in the middle. It's cramped and uncomfortable. I need the window." Nearby passengers started glancing over. The aisle clogged as people slowed down, curious about the commotion. Daniel kept his voice even. "I understand it's not as comfortable, but this is my assigned seat. I'm not moving." The woman let out a scoff that echoed through the cabin. "Unbelievable. A young man like you can't show a little courtesy to a woman. What happened to respect?" Daniel set his book down, sensing this wasn't going to end quickly. "Respect doesn't mean giving up something I paid for." Her sunglasses came off with a dramatic flourish, revealing eyes flashing with indignation. She looked around, raising her voice so half the row could hear. "Can you believe this? He won't give up a seat for a woman. A window seat, of all things." Instead of support, she was met with silence. A man across the aisle shook his head. A teenager snickered and whispered to his mother. The woman's lips pressed tighter. Daniel felt the tension growing but refused to let frustration show. He had dealt with entitled people before. The key was patience. Even when they tried to provoke, he leaned back in his seat, pulled his headphones halfway on, and said quietly, "Ma'am, this isn't up for debate." But she wasn't done. Not by a long shot. She dropped her carry-on bag onto the floor with a heavy thud and planted herself in the aisle like a soldier on a battlefield. "You don't understand. I have a condition. I get anxious if I can't see outside. I need the window seat." Daniel raised an eyebrow. "Then maybe you should have booked one." Gasps rippled from a few passengers who overheard. The woman's cheeks flushed red, but she doubled down, her voice climbing higher. "I didn't think I would need to. People are usually decent enough to offer." At this point, the boarding process had slowed to a crawl. A flight attendant hurried over, her professional smile looking a little strained. "Is there a problem here?" she asked, glancing between them. The woman pounced on the opportunity. "Yes, there is. He's in my seat. I need the window, but he won't move. I have special circumstances." The attendant bent slightly to check Daniel's ticket, then hers. She nodded. "Sir, you're in the correct seat." "Ma'am, your seat is right next to him, but I don't sit in the middle," the woman insisted, her voice rising again. "I shouldn't have to suffer because of some technical mistake. He's young, strong, and clearly doesn't care about comfort. Why can't he just move?" The attendant's polite tone hardened just slightly. "Ma'am, everyone is assigned a seat. If you wanted a window, it needed to be selected at booking." The woman looked around again. as if expecting the crowd to leap to her defense. Instead, people averted their eyes or smirked into their phones. Someone whispered the word Karen, and a ripple of quiet laughter spread. Daniel crossed his arms, steady as stone. He wasn't going to budge, not because of stubbornness, but because of principle. If he gave up now, she'd think her behavior worked. The flight attendant sighed softly, clearly recognizing the type of passenger she was dealing with. "Ma'am, please take your seat so we can continue boarding." The woman's voice dropped into a dramatic whine. "So that's it? You're just going to let me suffer?" The attendant's patience thinned. "Ma'am, seat B now," with a final glare at Daniel. The woman muttered under her breath and flopped into the middle seat, her movements jerky and full of attitude. She slammed the armrest down and crossed her arms tightly, breathing through her nose like a bull about to charge. Daniel slipped his headphones on and opened his book again, pretending to be absorbed in the page, though his heart was still racing. Around him, whispers and chuckles continued. The man across the aisle leaned over and whispered, "Good for you. Don't let her push you around." Daniel gave him a small nod of thanks. He didn't want to fight. He just wanted peace. But something told him this wasn't over yet. The woman beside him radiated anger like heat from an open flame, and the flight hadn't even taken off. The engines hummed louder as the last passengers boarded. Phones were still out, some recording slyly. Already, the story of row 14 was beginning to take shape, a story that wouldn't just stay inside that cabin but would soon take flight far beyond it. The cabin lights dimmed as the plane began its slow crawl toward the runway. Passengers buckled their seatbelts, some pulling out books, others closing their eyes in anticipation of the long ride ahead. Daniel let out a quiet sigh of relief, hoping the drama from boarding was finally behind him. He adjusted his headphones and stared out the window at the glowing runway lights, ready to lose himself in the view. But the woman beside him, the one who had caused such a scene just minutes earlier, wasn't letting things go. She shifted in her seat with exaggerated movements, elbowing Daniel more than once as though to remind him she was still unhappy. Every sigh she released was loud enough for the entire row to hear. "This is ridiculous," she muttered under her breath, though loud enough to carry. Stuck in the middle like some kind of nobody, all because he can't show an ounce of generosity. Daniel ignored her, his eyes fixed firmly on the horizon outside. He knew better than to add fuel to the fire. Still, he could feel her glare drilling into the side of his head. She wanted a reaction, any reaction. As the plane lifted off, the engines roaring, her mutters grew into complaints directed at no one and everyone at once. "Do you know how claustrophobic this is? My knees are cramped. My shoulders are trapped. It's inhumane." She glanced around, as if daring the passengers nearby to agree with her. Most avoided eye contact. A few rolled their eyes. When the seatbelt sign switched off, she wasted no time. She unbuckled herself with a dramatic snap and leaned over Daniel, pressing her face toward the window. "I can't breathe without seeing outside," she said, as though it were an absolute fact of life. Her perfume wafted strong as she tried to push her way closer. Daniel pulled back, his patience thinning. "Ma'am, please sit down. You're making this worse. I'll make it better," she said firmly. "If you won't move, I'll just share the window." Before Daniel could stop her, she shoved her shoulder against him, pressing halfway across his seat to peer outside. The intrusion was so blatant that people in the row across gasped. Daniel quickly pressed the call button for the attendant. It took less than a minute before the same attendant from earlier arrived, her calm professionalism still intact but clearly strained. "Ma'am," she said, "you need to stay in your seat. You cannot lean over another passenger like that." The woman sat back with an offended gasp, clutching her pearls like she had been struck. "Excuse me, I'm simply trying to breathe. He's hogging the entire window and I'm suffering." The attendant's tone sharpened. "You were assigned the middle seat. If you continue to disrupt your seatmate, we'll have to take further action." Passengers perked up at the words further action. Everyone knew what that meant. Possible removal or official warning. Daniel stayed silent, grateful the attendant had stepped in. The woman huffed loudly and muttered something about terrible service and heartless people. But for a few minutes she quieted down. Daniel finally leaned back against his seat, trying to calm his racing pulse. Unfortunately, peace didn't last. About 20 minutes into the flight, drink service began. The attendant came by with the carts, asking for orders. Daniel requested water. The woman ordered wine, 2 small bottles, both for herself. By the time the second was half gone, her voice had grown louder again. "Do you know," she said, slurring slightly though still sharp, "that I was supposed to be in business class, but of course, the airline messed up my booking. Now I'm stuck here." Next to him she jabbed her thumb at Daniel. Daniel kept his eyes on his book, but she wasn't finished. "And don't think I didn't notice how you smirked when they told me no," she snapped. "You enjoyed it. You wanted to humiliate me. That did it." Daniel closed his book, turning to face her directly for the first time since takeoff. His voice was calm but firm. "Listen, I didn't cause this. You did. I bought this seat. I didn't laugh at you. I just want to get to my destination in peace. Please stop making me the villain here." For a moment, silence hung between them. Passengers leaned in subtly, waiting for her reaction. Then she exploded. "Villain, villain. Her voice rose, carrying several rows back. You think I'm the problem here? You're selfish. You're cruel. You're a bully hiding behind your precious ticket. Her words were sharp enough to slice the quiet hum of the cabin in two. Heads turned, phones discreetly angled to capture the drama. She had officially turned the flight into a theater and everyone else into an audience. The attendant rushed back, her patience now fully gone. Ma'am, she said firmly, you need to lower your voice. You are disturbing other passengers. This is your final warning. The woman's face turned red. Oh, so now I'm the one disturbing people. Not him. You're all against me. Every last one of you. Her voice cracked with rage, her hands trembling. Ma'am, the attendant repeated, her tone colder now. If this continues, I will have to report you to the captain. The threat landed hard. Gasps rippled through the cabin. Being reported to the captain was no small matter. It could mean anything from a formal note in her passenger record to being banned from future flights. The woman opened her mouth, then shut it again. She slumped back into her seat, arms crossed so tightly her knuckles turned white. Daniel finally exhaled, tension draining from his shoulders. He stared out the window, silently thanking the attendant. But even in her silence, the woman radiated fury. She muttered to herself, shaking her head, whispering words no one could quite catch. Occasionally, her eyes darted to Daniel, burning with resentment. Around them, passengers whispered and snickered. Someone murmured, she's going viral for sure. Another replied, I already got half of it on video. Double quotes. Daniel realized with a strange mixture of relief and dread that this wasn't just an unpleasant flight anymore. This was becoming a story, a spectacle, something that would live online far longer than their 4-hour journey. As the plane cruised through the clouds, one truth became clear. The meltdown wasn't over. It had only just begun. The plane hummed steadily at cruising altitude, but inside row 14 the air was heavy with tension. Daniel pretended to focus on the book in his hands, though he had only read the same sentence 3 times. His seatmate, the self-proclaimed queen of entitlement, sat stiffly beside him, muttering into her wine cup. The earlier argument had drained him, yet he knew instinctively that she wasn't done. People like her never surrendered quietly. They only paused long enough to gather more ammunition. For 15 minutes, she kept to herself, fidgeting with the seatbelt, clicking her nails against the armrest, sighing dramatically as though auditioning for sympathy. Every few minutes, she'd lean forward and glance down the aisle, as if searching for a new audience to complain to. Daniel tried to ignore her, but her energy was impossible to miss, like a storm cloud buzzing with static, waiting to strike. Finally, she turned on him again. You think you've won, don't you? She hissed, her voice low but cutting. Sitting there smug with your little book, while I'm stuck here like a prisoner. Daniel didn't respond. He knew engaging her would only spark another scene, but his silence seemed to enrage her more than words ever could. She slammed her empty wine cup onto the tray table, startling the passenger in the aisle seat. I won't be silenced, she declared suddenly, loud enough for half the cabin to hear. Head swiveled toward her, phones lifted discreetly or not so discreetly as people sensed the drama building again. This airline doesn't care. The crew doesn't care. And you, she jabbed a finger at Daniel. You're enjoying this humiliation. The man in the aisle seat, who had been quiet until now, finally spoke. His voice was calm but firm. Ma'am, please. Enough. We all just want a peaceful flight. She whipped her head toward him, eyes wide with outrage. Oh, so now you're against me too. Everyone's against me. Her voice cracked, shrill with indignation. The murmurs of passengers swelled. A woman 2 rows back muttered, she's unbearable. Someone else whispered, she's definitely going viral. Laughter rippled softly through the cabin. Not cruel but unmistakably amused. That laughter tipped the scales. The woman shot up from her seat, wobbling slightly in the aisle. Laugh at me. Laugh at me. You don't know who I am, she shouted, her voice trembling with fury. I deserve respect. I deserve better than this. The flight attendant was there, within seconds, her professional mask slipping just slightly. Ma'am, sit down immediately. But the woman wasn't ready to back down. She raised her arms dramatically, addressing the entire cabin like a preacher before a reluctant congregation. All of you are complicit. You watch me suffer, and you say nothing. Shame on every single one of you. Passengers exchanged looks, some annoyed, some amused, some simply exhausted by her theatrics. Daniel, still seated, felt the stares shift. He wasn't the target anymore. She had turned her outrage on the crowd, and in doing so, she'd lost what little sympathy she might have had. A deep voice cut through the tension. It came from a man 3 rows ahead, tall and broad-shouldered, who stood slightly to peer back. Ma'am, enough, he said firmly. Sit down before you get yourself thrown off this flight. Cheers of agreement followed. Yeah, sit down, someone added. Another passenger clapped once. Sarcastically, the woman faltered. For the first time, uncertainty flickered across her face. She had expected support, solidarity, maybe even applause. Instead, she was surrounded by disapproval. She was outnumbered, alone, but her pride wouldn't let her retreat gracefully. You're all cowards, she snapped, though her voice had lost some of its earlier strength. Every one of you. You think you can gang up on me, but you'll regret this. The attendant's voice hardened. Ma'am, last warning. Sit down now or I will escalate this to the captain. The words hung heavy. Escalating to the captain wasn't just a threat, it meant official documentation, possible intervention upon landing, and in some cases, law enforcement waiting at the gate. The woman paled slightly, though she tried to mask it with another scoff. Reluctantly, she slid back into her seat, her movements jerky, her face flushed with humiliation. She yanked a seatbelt across her lap with a violent tug, as if punishing the buckle for daring to restrain her. Daniel exhaled slowly, but he didn't relax completely. He knew she wasn't finished. Entitled people rarely admitted defeat. They just waited for another opening. Sure enough, a few minutes later, she leaned toward him again, her voice sharp and venomous. You'll regret this, she whispered. When this video goes viral, you'll be the villain, not me. Everyone will see how cruel you were. Daniel turned his head to face her, his expression calm but resolute. I didn't record anything, he said softly. But everyone else did, and they saw exactly what happened. That's on you, not me. Her eyes widened, and for the first time Daniel saw something other than rage in them. Fear, just for a moment. Then she looked away, lips pressed into a thin line, retreating into a bitter silence. Around them, passengers whispered again. Some shook their heads. Others smirked knowingly. The man in the aisle seat leaned slightly toward Daniel and murmured, "Don't worry, nobody's on her side." Daniel nodded faintly, grateful for the reassurance. Still, he couldn't shake the uneasy feeling settling in his chest. She had quieted down. Yes, but he knew this wasn't the end of her tantrum. Not yet. The flight stretched on, the cabin buzzing with low chatter as people discussed what they'd just witnessed. Some replayed the clips they'd captured, chuckling quietly. Others speculated about whether the crew would file an incident report. Daniel sat still, staring out the window, the clouds below glowing faintly in the moonlight. Somewhere deep down, he knew this moment wasn't just a personal annoyance anymore. It was bigger than him, bigger than the woman beside him. This was a story already in motion, one that would outlive the flight itself. The turning point had arrived. She had alienated not just Daniel, but the entire cabin. And when the internet got hold of this footage, she would learn the harshest truth of all. Entitlement doesn't earn sympathy, it earns an audience. The cabin had finally quieted, but the silence felt fragile, as if everyone was just waiting for another outburst. Daniel sat rigid in his seat, the novel he had been trying to read now forgotten in his lap. Outside the window, the sky stretched wide and endless, a comforting contrast to the claustrophobic tension inside row 14. The woman, his infamous seatmate, wasn't fidgeting anymore. She sat stiffly, arms folded tight, her jaw clenched. But Daniel could tell she was seething, replaying the confrontation over and over in her head. He could almost hear her thoughts. They laughed at me. They turned against me. I'll show them. The flight attendants, however, weren't leaving anything to chance. Two of them returned together, their calm smiles tinged with the kind of seriousness that only appeared when things crossed a line. One knelt slightly to meet the woman's eye level. "Ma'am," the attendant began firmly. "We need to discuss what happened earlier. You disrupted other passengers, raised your voice multiple times, and refused to follow crew instructions. That's a violation of safety policy." The woman blinked rapidly, feigning innocence. "Violation? What violation? I was the one mistreated. I was denied a seat I needed for my health." The second attendant, holding a small tablet, spoke evenly. "We have witness reports from multiple passengers and video evidence. The captain has been informed. When we land, you will be required to speak with ground staff." A ripple of whispers traveled through the cabin. Daniel felt the man in the aisle seat tense beside him. Passengers leaned in, curious, phones tilted upward again. The drama wasn't just continuing, it was escalating. The woman gasped, clutching her chest as though the words had physically struck her. "This is outrageous. I'm the victim here. You can't punish me for being anxious, for wanting a little comfort." The first attendant's voice hardened. "What we can't allow is verbal aggression and disruption of the flight. That puts everyone at risk. You've been given multiple warnings. This is the final step." For the first time, cracks appeared in the woman's armor. Her indignation faltered, replaced by something Daniel hadn't expected to see: desperation. Her eyes darted from the attendants to the passengers, searching for an ally, but no one came to her defense. The man across the aisle folded his arms, unimpressed. A teenager 2 rows back shook his head and whispered, "Too late for sympathy now." The woman's lips trembled. "So what? You'll have me arrested for wanting a window seat?" The attendant's answer was steady. "No one wants that, but the captain has discretion. You need to cooperate fully for the remainder of this flight. Or, yes, law enforcement can be waiting at the gate." Gasps rippled again. The cabin seemed to shift, everyone aware they were witnessing something rare. Daniel felt both sympathy and satisfaction twist inside him. He hadn't wanted her punished. He had only wanted peace. But now, the consequences of her entitlement were unavoidable. The woman slumped back into her seat, her bravado deflating. "Fine," she muttered bitterly. "I'll sit here, silent as a stone, if that's what you all want." The attendants exchanged a look. Then one of them spoke more gently. That's all we ask, ma'am. Cooperation. Thank you. They walked away, leaving behind a row still thick with tension. For several minutes, nothing happened. The woman stared straight ahead, breathing hard through her nose. Daniel dared to hope it was finally over, but entitlement rarely dies quietly. 20 minutes later, during meal service, the woman struck again. As trays were passed down the row, she refused hers with a sharp shake of her head. I won't eat airline slop, she declared loudly. Not after the way I've been treated. Her words weren't directed at Daniel this time, but at the crew, and once again passengers rolled their eyes. A few chuckled under their breath. She caught the sound and whipped her head around. Think this is funny, she snapped. You're all pathetic, sitting there like sheep, doing whatever you're told. A middle-aged woman 3 rows back finally spoke up, her voice carrying with quiet strength. No, ma'am, we're just behaving like adults. You should try it. Laughter erupted across the cabin. Louder this time, freer. Daniel caught himself smiling despite the absurdity. The woman's face turned crimson. She opened her mouth, then shut it again. Her words drowned out by the collective reaction of the passengers. It was the turning of the tide. Undeniable now. She wasn't feared, and she wasn't pitied. She was a spectacle mocked, dismissed, recorded. She had lost control. Daniel leaned back, the tension easing slightly. For the first time since boarding, he felt the weight shift away from him. It wasn't his battle anymore. The cabin itself had united, strangers bonded by shared frustration and quiet defiance against her demands. The woman didn't try again after that. She sat stiffly through the rest of the meal service, her arms crossed, her lips pressed shut. Occasionally she muttered under her breath, but no one paid attention anymore. The power she thought she had was gone. Still, Daniel couldn't shake the heaviness in his chest. He wondered if the crew truly would call security at landing, if this flight would end with flashing lights and uniformed officers waiting at the gate. He wondered what story the videos would tell when they inevitably reached the internet. Would people laugh? Would they sympathize with her? Would they even notice him, the man who had simply wanted a window seat? He glanced around. Phones were still out. The screens glowed faintly as passengers rewatched the footage they had captured, showing it to seatmates whispering excitedly. There was no stopping it now. This story had already left the cabin. The woman must have realized it too. Her face had gone pale, her anger replaced by something heavier. Fear, regret. Every so often, she cast quick glances around, her eyes narrowing at the sight of glowing screens. She knew, just as Daniel did, that she wasn't just a difficult passenger anymore. She was about to become a headline dot as the cabin lights dimmed for the night portion of the flight. Daniel closed his eyes, trying to rest. But one thought lingered, sharp and unshakable. This wasn't just a bad flight. It was the beginning of her downfall, and everyone on board, Daniel included, was a witness. The hours after the confrontation passed in an uneasy blur. The hum of the engines and the dimmed cabin lights suggested peace. But Daniel knew better. Every so often, he caught the woman beside him shifting in her seat, her breathing uneven, her eyes darting toward the glowing screens of passengers who had captured her tantrum. Each whisper, each muffled chuckle seemed to scrape against her nerves like sandpaper. Daniel tried to focus on his book again but gave up. The words swam on the page, drowned out by the tension still radiating from his seatmate. He could almost feel her calculating, rehearsing excuses, or maybe even drafting a new outburst. But the flight attendants had been crystal clear: one more disruption and the captain would step in. For once, her pride was caged by fear. Hours later, the captain's calm voice echoed overhead. Ladies and gentlemen, we are beginning our descent. Please ensure your seatbelts are fastened and tray tables are secured. The announcement was routine, but the shift inside the cabin was not. Everyone seemed to lean forward slightly, anticipation buzzing. People whispered about what would happen when they landed. Would security be waiting? Would she be escorted off? Would the videos already circulating online have reached the evening news? Daniel adjusted his seatbelt and glanced sideways. The woman sat stiff as stone, her lips pressed so tightly they were nearly colorless. For the first time since boarding, she wasn't muttering, wasn't demanding, wasn't even glaring. She was shrinking. The descent was smooth, the city lights twinkling below like scattered jewels. But the closer they came to the ground, the more restless the cabin felt. Phones vibrated with notifications, comments, likes, shares already piling up as clips of the Meltdown spread like wildfire. Daniel heard one passenger whisper, "It's already on TikTok. Thousands of views." Another murmured, "This one's going viral tonight." The woman's face drained of color. She must have heard it too. Her hands clenched the armrests until her knuckles turned white. For someone who had spent the entire flight demanding control, she now looked utterly powerless. The landing gear clunked beneath them. The plane touched down with a gentle jolt. And applause rippled faintly through the cabin, the way it sometimes does after a long flight. But this time, the relief wasn't just about a safe landing, it was about surviving the chaos of row 14. As the plane taxied to the gate, the attendants stood poised in the aisle. Daniel noticed 2 men in dark uniforms waiting just outside the jet bridge. His chest tightened. This was it. When the seatbelt sign dinged off, passengers stood quickly, pulling down bags and stretching legs. but the attendants motioned for everyone to remain seated. "Please stay in your seats until law enforcement boards," one announced. Gasps followed, mixed with hushed murmurs. Phones tilted again. The woman froze. "Law enforcement," she whispered, her voice cracking. She turned to Daniel suddenly, her arrogance collapsing into desperation. "You can tell them, can't you, that this is all exaggerated, that I was just upset?" Daniel met her pleading eyes. He almost pitied her, but then he remembered the insults, the shouting, the way she had tried to bully him out of what he paid for. Calmly he said, "It's not my decision anymore." Two uniformed officers boarded swiftly, followed by the lead flight attendant. "Ma'am," the attendant said firmly, "please gather your belongings. You need to come with us." The woman's head shook violently. No, this is insane. I didn't do anything wrong. I was harassed. I was mocked. I was denied basic comfort." The officers didn't argue. They simply repeated, "Please stand." "Ma'am." Their voices were calm but carried authority that couldn't be ignored. Her eyes darted around the cabin one last time, searching for support. None came. Passengers stared back with blank expressions, some recording, others simply watching. The silence was damning. Finally she stood, her movements stiff and reluctant. She grabbed her designer bag, muttering bitterly under her breath, and allowed herself to be escorted down the aisle. Phones tracked her every step. Someone whispered, "There goes plain Karen." Laughter followed, and then she was gone. The cabin released a collective breath, the tension dissolving into chatter and even applause. The man in the aisle seat clapped Daniel on the shoulder. "You handled yourself well, kid. Didn't let her push you around." Daniel smiled faintly, relief washing over him. "I just wanted to keep my seat," he said quietly as passengers disembarked. Many shot Daniel encouraging smiles or whispered quick words of support. Some even joked, "You're going to be famous, whether you like it or not." He wasn't sure how he felt about that. Outside the jet bridge, the last thing he saw was the woman being led away by security, her sunglasses back on, her chin lifted as though she still had some shred of dignity to protect. But no amount of posing could erase what had happened or what had already gone online. By the time Daniel reached baggage claim, his phone buzzed with a message from his sister. "Is this you?" Attached was a link to a viral video with millions of views already. The title read, "Plain Karen demands window seat in Meltdown mid-flight." Daniel sighed, shaking his head. He hadn't asked for fame. He hadn't asked to be part of a viral circus. All he had wanted was a quiet flight with a view out the window. But life, it seemed, had other plans. Still, as he wheeled his suitcase toward the exit, he couldn't help but smile, because at the end of the day, he had kept his seat, his dignity, and his peace of mind. And the world had seen exactly what entitlement looks like when it finally crashes back down to earth.